In the early morning hours of May 20th, 1927, a young pilot climbed into a small, single-engine airplane in New York, waved briefly to a handful of onlookers, and pointed his nose toward the Atlantic Ocean. There was no co-pilot, no radio, and almost no room to move inside the cramped cockpit. The aircraft was loaded with fuel, hope, and a level of risk that today would seem unthinkable. 33.5 hours later, that same pilot would land in Paris to a roaring crowd and instantly become one of the most famous people on Earth. His name was Charles Lindbergh, and with a single flight, he transformed aviation from a daring experiment into a symbol of modern possibility. Charles Augustus Lindbergh was born on February 4, 1902 in Detroit, Michigan, but he grew up primarily in Minnesota, where open landscapes and mechanical curiosity shaped his early interests. His father, Charles August Lindbergh, was a lawyer and a U.S. congressman known for his independent political views, while his mother, Evangeline Lodge Land Lindbergh, was a science teacher who encouraged intellectual discipline. From a young age, Lindbergh showed an intense fascination with machines. He disassembled engines, repaired farm equipment, and spent countless hours trying to understand how things worked. That mechanical confidence would later prove essential in the unforgiving world of early aviation. Lindbergh briefly attended the University of Wisconsin to study engineering, but soon found traditional academics too confining. The sky called to him more strongly than the classroom. In the early 1920s, aviation was still new, dangerous, and thrilling. Pilots were often seen as daredevils rather than professionals, and airplanes themselves were fragile constructions of wood, fabric, and hope. Lindbergh began flying lessons in 1922 and quickly developed a reputation for calm precision and technical skill. To earn money, he worked as a barnstormer, performing aerial stunts and offering short rides to curious crowds across rural America. The work was risky, but it sharpened his flying instincts and deepened his comfort in the air. His career took a more stable turn when he became an airmail pilot. Flying mail routes in the mid-1920s was among the most hazardous jobs in the country. Pilots navigated through storms, darkness, and mechanical failures with limited instruments and little margin for error. Lindbergh's reliability and composure distinguished him. He logged long hours alone in the cockpit, learning to trust his judgment and maintain focus under pressure. These experiences quietly prepared him for the challenge that would define his life. In 1919, a French hotel owner named Raymond Orteg had offered a prize of $25,000 to the first aviator to complete a non-stop flight between New York and Paris. For years, the prize remained unclaimed, as several attempts ended in failure or tragedy. By the mid-1920s, advances in aircraft design renewed interest in the challenge. Lindbergh, then in his mid-20s and relatively unknown, believed he could succeed with the right airplane and meticulous planning. Backed by a group of St. Louis businessmen, he commissioned a custom aircraft built specifically for endurance rather than comfort. The result was the Spirit of St. Louis, a single-engine monoplane designed for maximum fuel capacity and efficiency. The plane had no front windshield. Instead, Lindbergh relied on side windows and a periscope for forward visibility. There was no radio communication, and the cockpit was so tight that movement was limited. Every pound mattered, and every decision reflected a balance between weight and survival. When Lindbergh took off from Roosevelt Field in New York on May 20, 1927, the runway was muddy, and the aircraft barely cleared nearby obstacles under the heavy fuel load. He faced more than 30 hours of continuous flight over the open ocean with minimal rest and constant fatigue. Sleep deprivation, icing conditions, and navigation uncertainties all threatened the mission. Against extraordinary odds, Lindbergh reached Paris on the evening of May 21st. As he landed at Le Bourget Field, an enormous crowd surged forward in celebration. He had completed the first non-stop transatlantic flight between New York and Paris, instantly becoming an international hero. Newspapers around the world hailed him as a symbol of courage and modern achievement.
Parades followed, medals were awarded, and aviation itself experienced a surge of public interest. Air travel, once viewed as a novelty or spectacle, suddenly seemed practical and inspiring. Lindbergh's achievement accelerated investment in airlines, aircraft technology, and international routes, leaving a lasting impact on global transportation. Fame, however, brought intense scrutiny and personal challenges. Lindbergh was reserved by nature, uncomfortable with celebrity, and often overwhelmed by public attention. In 1929, he married Anne Morrow, the daughter of a U.S. ambassador. She would become not only his partner, but also an accomplished aviator and author in her own right. Together, they explored new air routes and shared a passion for flight, forming one of the most recognized couples of their era. Tragedy struck in 1932 with the kidnapping of their infant son from their home in New Jersey. The crime shocked the nation and dominated headlines for months. Despite extensive investigations, the child was later found deceased, turning the case into one of the most infamous criminal events in American history. The trial and conviction of Bruno Hauptmann in 1935 brought legal closure, but did little to ease the family's grief. Seeking privacy and relief from relentless media attention, the Lindberghs spent significant time living in Europe during the mid-1930s. Lindbergh's public image became more complicated in the years leading up to World War II. He expressed views that favored American neutrality and became associated with the America First Committee, an organization advocating non-intervention in the European conflict. His speeches and positions drew strong criticism, particularly as global tensions escalated. After the United States entered the war, Lindbergh contributed to the aviation effort in technical and advisory roles, working with aircraft manufacturers and even flying combat missions in the Pacific as a civilian consultant. His expertise in aviation remained respected, even as debates about his political positions continued. In the decades after the war, Lindbergh gradually shifted his focus towards science, technology, and environmental conservation. He supported medical research, including early work related to organ preservation, and later became an advocate for wildlife and natural habitats. This evolution revealed a quieter side of his character, one concerned not only with machines and records, but also with the preservation of the natural world. He wrote books reflecting on flight, life, and philosophy, including The Spirit of St. Louis, which won the Pulitzer Prize in 1954, and offered a detailed account of his historic journey. Charles Lindbergh died on August 26, 1974 in Hawaii at the age of 72. His legacy remains complex, marked by both extraordinary achievement and public controversy. Yet the image that endures most vividly is still that solitary airplane crossing the Atlantic, guided by determination and skill at a time when such a feat seemed nearly impossible. Lindbergh did more than complete a flight. He changed how people imagined distance, technology, and the limits of human endurance. In the vast silence above the ocean, he proved that a single individual armed with preparation and courage could redraw the boundaries of what the world believed achievable.